Welcome to On the Pulse, our Hoop Nursing podcast. I am over the moon to be joined by Aimee Foster. Now, Aimee is a Royal Air Force Aeromed nurse with a vast experience in critical care. I'm really excited to explore this now with Aimee, especially because it is such a niche area of nursing, and I've got no idea about it, so I'm sure I'm going to have loads of questions. So thank you very much for joining me, Aimee.
Pleasure.
So I suppose my first question is going to be, being a nurse myself, but absolutely nowhere near your field of nursing and nowhere near your level of expertise, how did you get into the Royal Air Force and that area of nursing?
So I started off at university actually being part of the Territorial Army, who are now the Army Reserves. So when I was at university, I saw a little advertisement on a bus and I thought, oh, that looks fun.
Oh, wow.
I'll give that a go. And I was with one of my friends and we trotted off to a little recruitment day together, and so we ended up joining the Army Reserves, and I spent 7 years with the Territorial Army, and we had an absolutely brilliant time.
That is incredible.
I've got a bit of a background of hit military in the family as well. My nana was in the military, my dad was as well, so it sort of runs in the family a little bit. And so at university, obviously, once I qualified, I then went into intensive care as a qualified nurse. And I was still merged the two as an intensive care nurse and doing my job with the Army Reserves. And then I saw the most amazing recruitment video for the Air Force. And
that's where it started.
I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. Yeah. And I just sort of like filled my application in and off we went.
I think, again, for nurses or students even listening to this, or people just thinking and considering healthcare or nursing as a career, I would never, ever have thought of that. I suppose it's your influences, isn't it? If you've got that in your family, your nana was, very much in the military. And then it's seeing that poster that you mentioned, and thinking, actually, if people don't know, this is why this is so important to me in this podcast, is because we're giving people access to people and professionals who've been in that environment, and also give them the information. So perhaps somebody who wouldn't have had that exposure is now thinking, oh, wow, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much more outside of your 12-hour shifts. There's so much more that you can do. And now that I work with students, I will say to them, because sometimes they get a bit low and a bit, oh my God, this is what we're seeing on the wards and this is what we're going to be, stuck with doing. And I was like, no, absolutely not. My career as an example, I've done this and this. I've got friends who used to work on cruise ships as nurses. There's so much
just so
more
different again,
out
isn't
there.
it?
It's
amazing. I think that's a really good point. There is so much more out there. As you say, NHS, I have nothing against the NHS. I'm very much in favour of the NHS and grateful to the NHS. But I didn't, when you just mentioned the wards, I don't think it wasn't your bag really. It definitely wasn't mine. And I wanted something else. I know you did ITU, which is incredible. I think any ITU nurse, and again, I've not personally had experience in that, or professionally had experience, but I just think it's amazing. But it's not the same as a ward, is it? It's standard. I say standard ward very loosely, pardon the pun. But it's, your medical or your surgical, the general wards, and that pace of, it's quite similar in some respects, isn't it? I mean, you've done agency nursing.
Yes.
So you've got that as well. But I think, it just fascinates me how people can take their careers. And I think by you talking to people like that, you're giving people, without even realising, you're making people and influencing people's decisions that really impact their life. I think that's amazing. Eh?
I think it's important that they're aware that there are so many different opportunities for them.
I think honestly it's incredible. So in regards then to you, so you've just qualified, you've done ITU. Was that your first role in ITU then?
No, when I qualified initially, I went into acute neuromedicine. And then a bit of stroke rehab. So I probably did that for about 18 months, 2 years. Then went into ITU, did ITU for a couple of years, and then saw my amazing recruitment video for the Air Force, and then joined the Air Force after being qualified for about 4 or 5 years.
If you hadn't seen that video, would you have been aware of it, but also if you'd seen it earlier, would you have been confident enough to go on that journey with the Royal Air Force?
I think, to be fair, if I hadn't seen that video, I probably wouldn't have joined. So I
Really?
put my joining down to that recruitment video, definitely. And I probably wouldn't have joined in the route that I did with having had less experience, because there's a variety of different routes of entry into the military, and a lot of it depends upon whether you're going to go in as a junior rank, so go in as a corporal with not necessarily a lot of experience, or whether you go in as a commissioned officer and you've got, quite a few years of sort of acute care background behind you.
So where would you have gone in if you'd have gone in? Maybe would they accept a newly qualified nurse, for example?
Yes, yeah, they will. Yeah.
Okay,
there's
interesting.
Obviously there's interview processes, fitness tests, all those sorts of things to make sure that you're sort of suitable for a military life.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, you could. The military trains student nurses.
Wow.
Yes, so we've actually got our up in Birmingham. Our military nurses, Army, Navy, Air Force nurses, student nurses, and they join as part of the military, and the military then funds them through their nurse training.
That's incredible, isn't it? And so is that a cohort? They'd have a cohort every 6 months, every year?
I think it's every year. I think we have
a
cohort of military nurses go through.
But again, even that piece of information there, Aim, I think you probably take for granted because this is all in your head, but actually it's really important. So I'm so grateful to you coming here today because I didn't know that, and I've worked in recruitment of nursing for the last 12 years. I'm a nurse for the last 13, you think I'm 14. And I'm thinking, well, I've never heard of that. That was never an option for me. Not that I probably would have taken it, I'll be honest. It's far too brave for me and my likings. But I think for somebody listening, I'm hoping would think, actually, that's an option.
And it's a very good option from a financial perspective as well. You get paid a salary through your training.
Which is incredible.
Yeah.
But then to add that, I didn't really associate the two before this conversation. I knew the military would have had medics and would have had, clinicians, but it's almost how that even begins. So do you think your ITU background and having that experience and your neuro, was that a good platform for you then for that confidence piece?
Definitely, yes. And the military always are very interested in nurses who have A&E, ITU, theatres backgrounds, because that's a lot of our business is, the nurses who would fly out on a Chinooks to the battlefield, and run basically flying A&E.
Wow.
Then we have the critical care areas. And we've also got ward nurses as well. So we've got medical wards, surgical wards. So we've got nurses who specialise in that.
Wow. Again, it's that detail of, I would have assumed there would be, flying A&E. The fact you even got that, because I assume they get brought back then, the soldiers and I mean, who are your patients? And because soldiers is a very broad term, isn't it? But who, I suppose there's a couple of questions I've got here that are going to spiral, but who would be your patients?
It depends on where you are and what job you're doing. So I've done tours to Iraq and Afghanistan where I've been out there for 3 to 4 months at a time. And a lot of our patients were British soldiers. So, but also we would potentially look after, so if somebody was injured and they were part of the Danish military, we would potentially look after them as well. Also the Afghan soldiers, we would provide care for them. So that's if you were based out in, Iraq and Afghanistan on a tour, which obviously we've sort of finished and finalised that part of our sort of military experience. But I've been out to the Falkland Islands because the Falkland Islanders fall under British responsibility for their medical care. So
Still, okay.
Yeah, so if a Falkland Islander needs cardiac surgery, an Air Force team of nurses and potentially doctors will fly out to the Falklands and retrieve that patient and bring them back. So I've done that, and
that's incredible. Again, I'm saying the word incredible. I don't want to dilute it. But that's amazing.
You lose about a week of your life going there, though. It's a very long way. Really a long way.
It's ignorant, I know, but I was looking at the Falkland Islands with my family over the weekend. Funny enough, last week, I had no idea where it was. And it's so far away.
It's just a very long way away. Yes, yeah, we do it in 2 legs. So we fly out to the Ascension Islands. We take 2 teams. We'll leave one team in the Ascension Islands to sun themselves for 24 hours. The other team carry on flying out to the Falklands, will overnight in the Falklands, pick their patients up on the morning, back to Ascension. That team that's done the Falklands leg then rests. The team that gets on refreshed from the Ascension Islands will then look after the patients all the way back to the UK.
So the word rest there is quite ironic. Where do you rest and when do you rest in that situation? How on earth do you, because that is a long flight, so you've got your natural anxieties about, you know, any human being. When you're on a plane, you may enjoy it or you may not like it, but there is a level of anxiety on it. You know, you're moving to do for a purpose, you're traveling. There's a level of stress that comes along with it. So that's not rest time. So when do you rest in that situation?
Oh, it's very difficult. And if you're in Ascension, you get accommodation and you will have an overnight rest.
Okay.
When you go to the Falklands, you get there at night, you get accommodation, and you'll have your overnight rest at that point. But so in your flight, if you're looking after that patient for that 8 to 12 hour time period, that's your shift. You don't get a rest.
Okay.
There was quite a lot of research done in the military about our fatigue and fatigue levels. So because we do, you know, working in the back of an aircraft is that much more tiring.
Well, I can only imagine. That's the thing. I can't even imagine it because I've not done it, you know, and I've not even. It's not such a publicised part of nursing, is it? A marketed side of nursing. So, if we're not exposed to that, we can't understand that. I think, and that's I didn't realise that there were a whole team of nurses out there doing that. Even I know you're retired now from the Air Force, but there are people obviously still doing that now. So it's a case of, you know, why isn't this being, you know, why aren't people being targeted to recruit for that sector, if that makes sense? So why is it not being, the university's not talking about it? Why aren't the schools and the education system talking about these niches of interest? I mean, for me, and there are going to be tens of thousands of nurses that say, do you know what, the wards are not for me. And some will say, and I saw that myself in my cohort, where people left because they said that was their only image of a nurse. And it was very much, that's not for me.
Yeah, and we do actually have a recruitment team who are quite busy. And
Get in touch, I've got some ideas.
And they do go about sort of various shows and those sorts of things. And
right, okay.
Fairs, but they're a very small team. So they can only be in so many places at once. So maybe they need to come to Wales.
They do. And I just think let's get to start speaking to the schools. And if we educate, funny enough, I had a conversation earlier actually. I was on a Teams meeting with a gentleman, and he is a very influential CEO of a charity within healthcare. And his education, he was talking about education, his passion for is getting to the 11 to 16-year-olds and planting the seeds that there are other avenues in life. And actually care could be a really, it's not going to make you millions in healthcare. That's not why we go into it. We can make a difference and make an impact in our time here. So I think it's planting the seed that it's an attractive career path.
Absolutely. And varied.
Yeah, exactly.
Varied.
And just like here with you now, compared to my very sheltered little nursing career in comparison, what you have seen, I would never have even entered my ether of existence. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. So I think this is absolutely, I mean, for me, so interesting of what you've done. I think I would hope that even if one person was to hear this and think, actually, I'm going to persevere, maybe they're having a bit of a wobble, like we've all had during our training, and you go, oh, do you know what, this may be not for me. But then listening to this, thinking, that could be though for me. And actually, if somebody has got a military calling, because again, it's a vocation with the military, isn't it? I know it's definitely been with my nephew, since the age of 2 in his camouflage suits, but he's lived and breathed it, that's him. And it is a vocation. So if you can mix and blend those two to integrate, you've got an Air Force nurse.
Yeah,
a specialist.
I think one of the things that might put people off sometimes is like, oh, I've joined the military and that's me for life. And that's not necessarily the way. Okay. There are, when I first joined, I joined only for 6 years. I joined a 6-year short service commission. Yeah, so my terms when I joined the military was for 6 years only. And when you get to a certain point, the military will then say, right, would you like to do another 10 years? And even within those periods, you could still leave at certain points in time.
So you're not locked in?
No, you're not. Absolutely not locked in. So I did 16 years.
Wow.
And thoroughly enjoyed it. I had so many different opportunities, even within the military, to learn different things and go and do different types of training.
Do you know what, Aimee? Aimee has worked with us at Hoop now for over a year, isn't it? Maybe 2? We're coming up to 2 years?
I was on and off. More than that now.
Honestly, time doesn't just go. You just blink and you think. Aimee and I instantly had rapport, didn't we?
Definitely.
You and I. And honestly, Aimee I do consider a friend. And I think knowing you, I just know that you would be is the epitome, is that the right word? The epitome of a military nurse. If you were you would give me confidence if I was working with you. That's what you would do. You would instill that confidence in myself as well, not just in, oh, I'm with Aimee, I'm going to be fine. Actually, Aimee, I know you educate as you go. Are all of the nurses of the same ilk, if you will? Are they cut from the same cloth in their mindset?
Very similar, yeah.
Okay.
And that's one of the beauties about being in the military is a lot of us, we all sing from the same hymn sheet.
Okay.
We know that our role is to get that soldier back from Afghanistan, back home to his family, or whether they were, out in, the Far East, or whether they were in Bosnia or Kosovo, that's our role, and we all work as hard as possible to get that person home. And when you leave the military, it's very difficult to re-find that sort of ethos, because you're so used to it. Everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet.
And I imagine it's just so different, isn't it? And you can't find that. You can't... And that's actually it, isn't it? Because I know you do a lot of work, in education now, but also still in critical care. You've been, emergency care. That's still fire is in you, isn't it? Still, very much so. But it's probably not going to have the same effect that period of your life did. Can I ask, I suppose, with all of this experience, what would you say was one of the most... We've all got them, that shift that you just remember. In your case, not a shift, that day. What's that one day where you think, I'm going to take that with me when I go? That kind of memory of, oh my God.
I remember flying home a soldier who been quite badly injured. I think he'd lost a leg, which as the Afghan conflict went on, only losing one leg was actually quite good because a lot of our soldiers lost multiple limbs. And this guy we basically run an ITU in the back of an aircraft, and we have consultant anaesthetists, ITU qualified nurses, medics, equipment technicians, and so we fly with all the kit that you could think of.
My head's in my hands, just FYI. Wow, I can't... So do they perform surgery?
Not necessarily, no. The surgery would have been done in Camp Bastion, for example, and our role is to safely transfer that person from Afghanistan.
Stabilising them.
Yeah, and then we fly them safely, maintain them until we get them back to Birmingham. But this guy was sort of nicely, gently sedated, not completely flat out. You could still communicate. He'd nod, he'd shake his head, he'd go back to sleep again. And I introduced myself to him. So even in the back of the aircraft, body armour and helmet on, I said, my name's Aimee and I'm going to take you home. And he woke up and he started crying. And I was like, oh my God. And he went like that, like he was nursing a baby and his wife had just given birth. And I had to take myself into the corner of the aircraft and have a moment with myself. Because I was like,
Aimee,
this is the best job. This is why I do this. And I did have to have
you
5 minutes.
You just saved his life and he's about to go see
you. So we didn't save his life. We just took him home,
But if you'd been left... That's the thing, you did say...
But it was a team effort, it's the nurses and the doctors that work in the forward, they're the medical emergency response team, the flying A&E, the guys that picked him up from there, the guys in the field hospital in A&E, the ITU in the field hospital, us that then retrieve him and fly him back, his ongoing recovery, so it's an entire...
fundamental, isn't it?
It's an entire sort of process. We were just a part of that.
I think
but I won't ever forget that guy at all.
I can imagine. I mean, wow. I mean, that... I suppose because I have children, it makes you think, oh God, you can't even begin to think. And his wife or partner at home must have just been, and that's the thing, isn't it? As a nurse, you don't just think of the patient, it's the associations then, it's the relatives, it's the the holistic approach.
And what we used to do towards the end of the conflict is, because the families wouldn't necessarily always know what had happened, they would get somebody show up at their door and inform them of bad news and say, your son, your husband, your wife, etc. has been injured. They're currently here. They're going to be flown back. And the families, because quite frankly, the people sort of informing them wouldn't be necessarily medical. They wouldn't really know what was happening. And so we'd get to Birmingham with the patient and the family were like, what's happened, what's going on, and once you take a patient into ITU, you then got a period of time where you need to stabilise them. So we can't have the families in because they've just spent 12 hours in transit in an aircraft. They then need to be assessed, reviewed, stabilised, that sort of thing. So the families are still sat out there waiting. And so what we ended up doing was actually, as a team who'd flown that patient home, sitting down with the family and saying, we've just spent 12 hours with your child, your husband, etc. This is what's happened. And this is how they've been, and this is now what's going to happen. You know,
that is so key though. That part of your role and doing that, you know, as a mother, as a sister, as a human, you would I don't know if you've had that experience, but when your child is compromised in some way, that time is so long. That minute feels like a day.
Yeah.
So for them, those hours, which possibly could be hours, couldn't it, when you're trying to stabilise somebody, there's hours for that relative, and it's not forgetting that.
Yeah, and they're fearing the absolute worst in their heads. But for us as a team, it was actually quite difficult because we were exhausted. You know, so our day, potentially, because we would do a month on call, so we'd spend a lot, you know, our normal day-to-day working life working in an ITU within, you know, a military hospital that has close links with the military. And so we would spend, you know, our normal day-to-day life doing those sorts of 12-hour shifts to maintain our clinical currency. We'd then spend a month at a time on call. So as a team, we'd go down to RAF Bryce Norton and we'd take over the month rota for the critical care air transfer team. And so as a team, for a month, we'd sort of live and work together. And we'd go in and check all of our equipment. We'd make sure all of our consumables are in date, make sure all our kit, our batteries, our oxygen, all that sort of stuff was, you know, as it should be. And so our normal working day doing that sort of thing would be 8 till 5. You know, we'd do some training, we'd do some exercise, we'd check all of our equipment. But you might get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the afternoon saying, you know, there's a casualty in Afghanistan they're currently ventilated in Afghanistan, you need to go and retrieve them. Your aircraft has been now booked for you for 7 o'clock this evening. So you've now got 4 hours.
My goodness.
Bearing in mind you've been up at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, you've done your working day, office day, you've then got to get an aircraft and all your kit onto that aircraft at 7 o'clock at night. You get onto the aircraft, you get all of your patient briefings before you get on, so you know what the patient's like, their condition's like before you get onto the aircraft. Then as a team, we set up all of our stretchers, all of our equipment, all of our oxygen, all of our power. We take everything with us. We don't necessarily take anything from the aircraft at all. Set all of that up, have some food, get your roll mat out and your sleeping bag, and you lie on the aircraft floor and you fall asleep.
Oh my goodness,
And
Aimee,
then
wowzers.
You'll wake up, it'll take about 8 hours, I can't remember, roughly 8 hours to get out to Afghanistan. So
on a lovely peaceful flight of a floor. I'm imagining a hard tin floor.
I could sleep standing up, I can. Really.
I suppose, yeah, bed of nails.
Slept in some very entertaining places in my career. Definitely, I could sleep standing up. And so you then get sort of woken up by the aircrew probably about 90 minutes before you land, an hour before you land, another quick meal, wash your face, brush your teeth. The team based out in Camp Bastion will meet you at your aircraft. They will take you to the patient, and they're absolutely incredibly organised. They would have CT scans ready to go. They'd have all the notes photocopied. They'd have all their drug charts. They'd have all the documentation that you would need. You go to your patient with your team and you package your patient onto all the transfer kit. You take them back to the aircraft, and that's when your 12-hour shift starts.
Oh my goodness, I'm tired just even hearing that, if I'm honest, because I'm quite a visual person, so it's putting myself in that situation. You've done all that in that day, you know, as you said, the office side of it. Then you're on that plane. Then you're trying to attempt, and as much as you can sleep anywhere, there's got to be a part of you that your subconscious is on high alert anyway, because you're waiting to be woken up. So it's not quality sleep. And then you've got to obviously put the patient safely onto the aircraft to go back. And then your 12-hour shift starting.
Yeah.
So you've just done a 12-hour, well, and some, and then expectation is you've got to then carry on. And we, again, it's that with any nurse, you know, there's mistakes are made, aren't they? We're humans. We're not robots. You can't replace a nurse with a robot, you know. But we're also human. So you've got needs of your own, basic human needs.
Yeah.
You know, so when you think of it like that, I mean, it's fascinating. It just blows my mind, because I just think that what you've seen and your influences in life, and it must just change your perspective on everything.
I'm very much so. I think we were always fortunate that we'd always fly with 2 nurses. So if we had one patient, there'd be 2 nurses. So you've always got a second pair of eyes to look at things. And, you know, we'd always say, right, okay, who's going to go and get their head down for a little bit of a sleep, and we'd always rotate within a team. Even if we had 2 patients, we might have 3 nurses.
Right, okay.
So we'd always add on. So there's always extra people around. And, we'd work with the doctors, and we'd say, right, okay, such and such is going to go and have a break. So the doctor then takes over the care of the patient for a couple of hours, because we all worked as a team.
So that, I suppose then, staffing ratios are better.
Very much so.
So it's not even relatable to nurse, any other element of nursing, is it? And any other specialism, it's not. It's not something that you could say, you can't compare. Because it's so unpredictable, I imagine. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think it's unpredictable, isn't it? You don't know.
You never quite know what a patient's going to do. I had a patient wake up from a very, very deep sedation mid-flight and then tried to extubate himself and then got off his stretcher. And he was an absolutely massive Samoan with a gunshot wound, and he sort of, ended up damaging his surgical site, and he had some very delicate surgery done out in Camp Bastion because the surgeons out there were spectacular. And you've never seen so many people jump onto a patient, because the last thing we needed to do was for this patient to extubate himself, pull his ET tube out, pull his lines out and get off the stretcher.
Oh my goodness. I'm grimacing because I'm just thinking how traumatic that would be.
So stuff can 100% go wrong. And that's, assuming your aircraft isn't going to break.
So, I mean, we'll leave the aviation concerns. I'll leave that for another episode completely. I think Rhian's anxieties on aviation. Oh my goodness. So through all of that, what you shared, I'm really grateful that you've done that. What would you say to somebody who's listening and that they would think, okay, I still want to do this? So what would you say is one piece of advice you would have for them?
I would say, and this is a very strange piece of advice, actually. Well, there's a couple
I don't
pieces.
expect anything less from this.
Do a good few years in the NHS first.
Okay.
So get your basic understanding of nursing, whether it's wards, whether it's A&E, whether it's ITU. Do some time in the NHS so you understand what your nursing
Great
is.
piece of advice.
Yeah. So do that. Know how to give your IV drugs. Know
confidence,
all that. So be a confident, competent nurse. So give yourself. I think I did about 4 or 5 years in the NHS before I joined the Air Force.
Okay.
And the next strange piece of advice I tell every single person that I meet who's going to join the military is buy a house. Because we have a lot of service personnel who leave the military, become homeless. Because in the military, we get given everything. We get given a good salary, we get a good pension, we get housing, we get food. We don't worry about how expensive it is for gas, electric, council tax, because we don't pay them. If you live in, so when I first joined, I lived in the officers' mess, and I paid...
What is that?
Think of it as student accommodation.
Okay.
But for grown-ups who drink a little bit too much.
Okay.
Actually, a bit like student accommodation, then, basically.
Yeah.
With a dining facility.
Okay.
So, and you get that for all ranks. You'll have the junior ranks accommodation, you'll have sergeants and senior NCOs accommodation, you'll have officers accommodation, and that's for single people. If you get married, you're then entitled to a married quarter for yourself and your partner.
Okay.
But what you pay is by far less than what people pay.
So it's not reality.
It's not reality. Okay. And you get a lot of people new into the military, and they're buying super fancy cars and, just really, really, being very extravagant with their money, but not thinking that when they leave the military in X amount of years, they've got to find somewhere to live. And so I always say to somebody, buy a house. It doesn't matter whether you're going to live in it or not. Be a landlord, buy a house.
Doesn't matter the size of it.
Doesn't matter the size, doesn't matter where it is. Because
that
when you leave the military, you've got somewhere to live.
That information, I think, and you've seen that obviously firsthand several times. I'm assuming you've seen it over and over again. That is incredible advice, because again, I would never have even thought of that.
Yeah, so I did that with my sister. I spent 3 or 4 months in Iraq, and I realised how much money I should have left over at the end of every month if I wasn't buying expensive shoes and going out all the time, because I lived in Birmingham, great night out in Birmingham. And I realised how much money I should actually have left over at the end of every month. So my sister and I bought a flat together.
So sensible. it's practical as well. I think that's
Very,
practical advice. I think that is, you know, people can say, oh yeah, stick at these things and all that, but actually that is practical and that is essential, if you ask me then. And to the point now, thinking, you know, for my nephew, to go back to him, thinking he needs to think of these things. And he's 16, but he wants a career in there, 20 years or whatever it is, and God willing, that allows. But that is so, I would never have even entered my head. So thank you, that is incredible.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank
It's
you.
a joy to be able to talk about the Air Force.
Oh,
I love it.
Honestly, I can tell, and I love that. So thank you, honestly, it's been great. Thank you.